Hi, everyone. My name is Angelica Rubio, representative for District 35, and I am here live wanting to share just some updates on what's happening at the legislative session. I am currently in Las Cruces, which is where my home base is, and have chosen to stay in at home because of COVID and being sure that we are staying safe as possible. I'm happy to share how all of that has been going. And so I'm looking forward to just talking a little bit about that. I also wanted to give some updates on legislation that I'm also carrying. I know that there's a few pieces that many of you who are watching are interested in. And so I am happy to provide some of that insight. I don't really have a format in terms of how I'm going to handle tonight's discussion, but what I would encourage you folks to do is if you're watching from Zoom, if you could add your Q&A, if you can add your Q&A on the your questions on the Q&A, and I can certainly take those questions on there, as well as if you're watching from Facebook, you can please put them on the comment section. Please bear with me. I'm managing all of this on my own. So I'm trying to keep tabs of what's happening on the Facebook Live, as well as what's happening here on Zoom. So with that, first and foremost, I went up to Santa Fe opening day, and as I mentioned before, it was a pretty intense situation because there's a lot of security, especially with all that was going on back early around in mid-January, in days before the inauguration of President Biden. And so there's a lot of security that still exists. And so I went up for the day, and then we went ahead and formalized the rules so that we would only be handling, especially in the House side, we are 100% virtual, which means that even though there's legislators at the Roundhouse in Santa Fe right now, they have to follow and do all the things that we do legislatively via a laptop or a computer. And so you have folks who are sitting in their offices who are participating in that way. I chose to stay here in Las Cruces because it's just better for me to do so. And I feel like it has been, one, personally very healthy for me, because it's allowed for me to just be home and be with my dog, and just be able to like cook healthy meals and ride my bike, which has been really important to me. Something that I couldn't do in Santa Fe. But it has also, more importantly, allowed me to really be laser focused on the legislation that I'm carrying. And of course, now chairing transportation and capital works, which is a big deal, which I plan to share a little bit about that shortly. One of the most amazing pieces of going virtual here in 2021 in the midst of this global pandemic also is the amount of public participation that we have had in the legislature. Part of the argument, some of the arguments that folks have, especially from the Republican side, is that we're shutting down the Roundhouse, that there's nobody allowed to go in, and that's going to limit public participation and transparency. That's 100% false. In fact, last week I presented 3 of my bills that I'm working on. One is to end our dependency on private prisons, as well as paid sick leave. And in addition to that, our housing bill with that myself and Representative Andrea Romero are carrying. In each of those hearings, we had over 100 people call in and testify. I mean, even the paid sick leave bill, you had people calling in during their shift to share some of their reasonings as to why they were supporting paid sick leave, which to me was just an amazing testimony in terms of one, public participation, but two, just the ways in which we're democratizing the legislature, and what can we be learning so that we can carry this on for the future. And so that's been really emotionally, for me, important, because I love to just see more people participate. And we've certainly been seeing it over the course of these last few um, weeks. Second or third, translation. We have been able to have simultaneous translation through Zoom. And that has been an incredible opportunity as well for Spanish speaking constituents from around the state. We've had people testify from Farmington, Hobbs, Lovington, Deming, all of the different places all around the state. And so it's really, really encouraging to me. And I am really, really excited about all of that. And so I want to take a break really quickly, and in terms of just where we are with the legislature, we haven't really necessarily voted on anything big yet on the floor. All of the work that we've been doing is on the committee itself and in the committee stages. But I know that Thursday and Friday, we will be on the floor, technically on the floor. And I'm not quite sure yet what we plan to vote on, if anything. But I certainly will keep you all posted on that. I know that we have a lot of really great pieces of legislation this year, especially in the House. We've been asked to focus primarily on 5 pieces of legislation. And as if you participated in any of my town halls right before the session, there's about 5 bills that I'm working on that I'm hoping to get passed. And so one of the big pieces of legislation that I'm working on right now, and I'm doing so with Representative Melanie Stansberry and Speaker Brian Egolf, is the Climate Solutions Act. We had not had a name for it during the town halls that I hosted, but that bill has finally been introduced. It is House Bill 9. And it's really, really exciting because, as I've mentioned in a lot of the press that we've done, and today we had a webinar on it, is that it is legislation that has been in the making for years, and it's really homegrown and being led by communities who are on the front lines of what it means, front lines of the communities in which are being impacted directly by the oil and gas industry and the transition that we will be facing over the course of the next few years. It also has a lot of really good things related to climate. And so I can answer some of the questions around that. I have a really hard time, to be honest, talking about the technicalities around the climate piece, because I'm just not a scientist and it's really hard for me to describe. But I can share more in detail as to how this will impact workers, specifically when it comes to education and training and the overall mechanisms within House Bill 9, which is the Climate Solutions Act. The second one is paid sick leave. Paid sick leave, it started off as House Bill 37, and then another one is House Bill 20. Representative Chandler, who is sponsoring House Bill 20, which is now very different than what we had proposed initially, is now in the process. We went ahead and merged both bills, and it is now House Bill 20. It made it out of committee, the first committee last week, and it's heading to, I believe it's Judiciary next. I have a lot of really good faith that, a lot of faith in our legislators that they will support it. And so we have some really good momentum on that one. I did forget to mention that the Climate Solutions Act, it also made it out of committee on Saturday. And so it's also heading to its second committee. and we have a really good feeling that we'll make it through the House, and then really the work will have to happen in the Senate. The private prison bill, that one is kind of up in the air at this point. It is scheduled to be in judiciary on Wednesday, but I will say that we are probably going to face some challenges in terms of getting Democratic votes in that committee. And so if you are following the private prison legislation, I would encourage you all to contact each and every one of the Democrats on that committee and urge them to support the legislation. Um, it's a really important piece of legislation. We have had some conversations with some of the folks who are opposed to it. Much of it has to do with the fact that they're worried about their communities and and the jobs that are there, which is understandable. But in the same way that I talk about economic diversification and moving away from oil and gas, the same has to be said with issues like private prisons. We in New Mexico have a bad habit of investing in these exploitative industries that do nothing for our communities. Private prisons being one of them, and it's really a sad uh, story here in New Mexico, because while we're profiting off of bodies and incarcerating people, which we should never be doing, we've also made it so that communities are now stuck trying to figure out how to survive without them. And so I think it's the responsibility of our state, it's the responsibility of our federal government to really step in and not only support the end of private prisons in New Mexico, but also support these communities into figuring out a roadmap for their own recovery, even just beyond COVID, because I think that is really, really critical. One of the things that we've mentioned with the private prison bill is that regardless of House Bill 40, if it makes it through or not, private prisons will go away. Um, because that is just the trend, and if we are not doing something to support these communities, we are just as much responsible for we're just as much responsible for making sure that they are provided with all that they need to move forward, and we need to be a part of that solution. um, I'm also working on another piece of legislation which would create the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. That just had its first hearing today, and that made it through. It passed Health and Human Services this morning, and it is now heading to its second committee. I will say that the Prescription Drug Affordability Board will have a bit of a challenge, I think, moving forward, because it is a huge idea. It is a big idea, but and then there's just a lot of intricacies. We don't No other state has done it. So there's two other states that have already begun to implement it, but we yet don't know what the progress has been there. And I think those are just a lot of questions that people have around it. And I think today's discussion around in Health and Human Services was one that was really important to have, because I think it was sort of like our first take in some of the questions that people had. But one guarantee that I did get from Representative Debbie Armstrong, who is the chairwoman for Health and Human Services, and who is one of our best experts in the legislature when it comes to healthcare and anything related to healthcare, is that whether or not this legislation makes it through, she is very much committed to making sure that in the interim, we address these issues, because it's something that is so important to so many of us all across the state. Finally, the Healthy Food Financing Initiative, that is making its way through the Senate. So Senator Carrie Hamblin is my co-sponsor in the Senate, and so we decided to start it there. And so it is making its way. I'm not really quite sure where it's at right now. I apologize if I don't have the details for that. I haven't actually been paying a lot of attention to the Senate, to be quite honest. But I know that from the conversations that we've been having via text with the senator and some of the advocates, there is a lot of really good momentum on the Senate side for all of that. And so I'm really excited about where we are with this legislation. I know that there's legislation that many of you all are really interested in that maybe I'm not carrying, and so I'm happy to answer those questions. I know there might be questions related to the cannabis bill. There's actually 4 bills that have been introduced related to recreational cannabis, and so I'm happy to answer some of those questions as well as any others that might be um, in um, in that you all might have. I do have some questions in Q&A. There's a couple. So we have a question related to the committee that will review private prisons. So which is the what is the committee? The question is which is the committee that will review private prisons? So Wednesday afternoon, the House Judiciary Committee is scheduled to hear House Bill 40, which is the private prison bill. We will present that bill on Wednesday. I know that there's still a lot of work that we need to do between now and the afternoon to find out our support, because as I mentioned, we may not have every Democrat voting for our bill. And so there's going to be quite a lot of work that we need to do over the course of the next 48 hours. So if you have a legislator that is serving in the House Judiciary, or just you have some time to call and email each of the representatives, I would encourage that, and I would encourage all your friends and family who care about this issue as well, to reach out to them and to urge them to vote for House Bill 40. We have never had a debate on the House floor around private prisons, and I do believe that it is time for us to have this debate. And I'm looking forward to having that if and when we do. And so I would encourage you all to reach out to our legislature, to our House Judiciary, and ask them. It's a majority Democrat versus Republican. So, I mean, you can certainly reach out to Republicans if you want. But really at this point, we're really asking and directing people to reach out to our Democratic majority to make sure that they hold the line. I know that there's a lot of concerns about the jobs issue. And it's a really passionate issue to that I think folks really feel deeply about, and I get it. I totally understand it. And I think it's really important that we proceed with this bill. This bill gives us a 3 to 5 year transition period for communities and for the state to take over some of these facilities. Unfortunately, you have folks at the counties who are saying that it's going to do away with jobs. It's going to do that. There's debt that they owe. Like, it is a mess. This whole thing with related to private prisons is a huge mess. And the sooner that we get away from it, the better is really where I'm at with that. So again, I encourage you all to reach out to House Judiciary. There's another question. What was the last Senate bill that Representative Rubio mentioned? So the one that I was talking about is called Healthy Food Financing Act. It is a mechanism that we are trying to create a framework for within state government so that we could access not only state funding, but federal funding to make healthy foods more available and more accessible to our communities, especially in rural and isolated areas where healthy foods is very hard to get. And so there's funding that's available that we would be able to really get to utilize and make sure that our communities have access to not only funds, especially ranchers and farmers who have been doing this work for a very long time, but for folks who have been marginalized, especially if you're a Black, Indigenous, or community of color, or a farmer who represents a community of color. This healthy food financing is something that will help to elevate some of these issues when it comes to ag and making sure that we have opportunities available for people to to not only grow their healthy foods, but to be able to provide them for the rest of New Mexicans. Again, I know that this is a lot of information, and there's a lot of things going on right now as it pertains to the session. We are at the start of I think this is the third full week. We'll stop introducing legislation at the end of this month, February 28th. What is it, 28 days in February, right? So by the end of this month, we will no longer be able to introduce more legislation. I have no intention of introducing any more legislation, but I will say that as a chair of transportation, which is something that I just took on this year, um, it has been quite the experience, especially because for the very first time in its history, the department is going to have one of the largest budgets ever. And so I think for me, one of the issues that I've been dealing with is accountability, because I think that as the main sponsor of House Bill 3, which is the transportation bill, which then goes into the appropriations bill, which basically pays all of our bills across the state. Um, we're trying our best to figure out, like, not only are we spending this money the right way, but also that it's done equitably. And so I think in many cases, as someone who is just starting out in this role, um, and I'm not gonna be shy about saying that also, as a woman and as a woman of color, to also be in this committee where it's normally dominated by men. It's been a pretty tough road the last 3 weeks in terms of just having to navigate all of it. And so if there are any if we ever hear of any issues related to patriarchy and all of that, like, I feel like I've experienced all of that over the course of the last few weeks. And but my hope is that we remain solid and we may remain strong as we move forward, because I think that there are a lot of really great things happening. There's a lot of really great pieces of legislation that we hope to move over the course of the next few weeks. And as I've mentioned in my town halls previously, is that I do believe that this could be the most transformational legislative session that we've ever had. And I'm really hopeful about that. The one piece that I didn't talk about was broadband. Broadband has its first hearing tomorrow. It's House Bill 10. It's actually going to be heard first in the committee I chair, which is transportation. And tomorrow is going to be all about broadband, because Representative Anthony Allison from the northwestern part of the state and represents the majority of Navajo Nation. He is introducing a House Joint Resolution, which would be a constitutional amendment to address issues related to providing public assistance to build infrastructure in a lot of around the state, particularly in places where it's hard to reach because of some of the big issues around that. Uh, it has to go through a constitutional amendment process, and so we are going to be hearing that piece of legislation tomorrow. Um, I'm looking at our Facebook Live. And I don't know if folks have any questions, please feel free to add them into the comments. For folks who are watching on Zoom, please feel free to add any questions into the Q&A, and I'll be happy to answer. Otherwise, if we don't get any questions, I'm happy to go have dinner soon and hang out with my dog. But I certainly wanted to provide folks with at least some insight in terms of where we are right now with the legislative session, where we're going, and just some updates on my legislation that I'm sponsoring. I intend to host one of these every other week from now on. Sorry about that. My dog is right here making noises. Hey, okay. And so I'm happy to provide as much details as possible over the next couple weeks and share some updates around what's happening in the legislature, what's happening with legislation. And I know that if there are some big pieces of legislation that you're really interested in, please feel free to email me any details, and I can certainly provide some updates if and when I can make those available. But for now, it doesn't look like there's any questions from folks on the Facebook Live or from the Q&A here in Zoom land. And so if there are no questions, folks, I just want to take a moment to just thank you all. I appreciate the amount of interest that I have seen from so many people about the legislative session this year. I know that there's a ton of issues that we need to grapple with and to really address. And I think that there's a lot of us in the House of Representatives, especially, who are really trying their best to figure things out. And so I have a lot of faith in our House caucus and the folks who are in our House of Representatives. They are truly centered in making sure that we are addressing and doing all the right things. I know the Senate, I think it took a while for the Senate to really get going, especially when it came to technology. I haven't really been following, as I mentioned, what's going on that side, because a lot of our bills haven't made it that way yet. But as soon as our bills do start making it to the Senate, we will certainly have more interaction with folks on the other side. And so I'll have more details as things progress. But I think for now, things are just kind of moving along. With us not being in Santa Fe, it makes it, I think, for some people, I think it makes it a little bit harder. I've been able to really adapt pretty well and pretty quickly. I mean, I can use my Zoom on my phone and on my laptop and be in 2 or 3 different places simultaneously. And so for me, that's been just really helpful, and in terms of just running around a building, um, and sometimes not making it on time to present a bill, or having to get a bill rolled over because we ran out of time. There's just so many things that are so different in the session that while I know it's overwhelming to some people, I think overall it's been a really I don't know. I don't really know how to explain it other than if people tell you that it's really shut people out of the process, I actually believe the opposite of that. I really do believe that while there are some people who still don't have access to technology or broadband and all of that, like I am totally aware of that. But I do believe that there are still more people who are getting to participate in ways that they never could before, especially folks from here in Las Cruces, Doña Ana County, not being able to cross a border checkpoint and go up to Santa Fe. Um, uh, like folks from rural New Mexico, especially down here in the South, or places up in and around the northwestern or southeastern part of the state, you could drive up to Santa Fe, get your bill scheduled. You were scheduled to give a talk on or do public comment on a bill. There were times where people would wait all day to hear a bill, and then it wouldn't get heard, and then they would have to drive back home, and who knows when they would be able to go up to Santa Fe again. And so there's just those little things that people don't realize, that that we actually were not making our Roundhouse as open as I think it should have been. And this process has really allowed for us to do that, in my opinion. And so I'm really grateful for what we've been able to do and what we plan to do over the course of the next few days and weeks. So with that, everyone, thank you for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. If there are any questions, please feel free to email me or send me a text. Text is always easier. My information is all public, so please feel free to reach out. I also am constantly providing updates on my Facebook, as well as on my Twitter and Instagram. So please don't feel like you can't reach out. I will do my best to answer any questions that you all may have. So with that, thank you, everyone. Have a good night, and we'll talk to you soon.